The next project on the front end of this CSR 650 is to replace the bearings in the steering column. I've already got a lot of this front end dismantled because I'm doing several other things to the front end, including new oil seals in the forks, checking the brakes, and checking the bearings in the hub. To get to this, I need to get rid of all of this stuff here. So I'm going to pull all these gauges off. I'm not going to take them off the bike, just going to get them out of the way and remove some of these lines and some of these brackets. I'm also going to remove the handlebars. When I get to that stage, we'll start filming again and we'll disassemble this triple clamp and remove those bearings. So all of the peripherals have been either removed or moved aside, and I need to remove this pinch bolt and this bolt here in the top. Now on this bike there's a crown nut on the bottom here, which is going to hold this lower part of the triple clamp in place. Make sure that if you're going to pull this, that this bottom isn't going to fall out from underneath you. A couple of side notes. You'll see here that I've got the handlebars upside down, which puts that brake fluid reservoir upside down as well. If I wasn't going through the brakes right now during this whole process, I would want to bleed the brake lines after I got the handlebars back up in place. The other thing I'm kind of noticing too here, which I hadn't picked up on until just now, is either there's something very wrong with the bearings in here, or there's some kind of a positive stop in the center and just slightly into a turn. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on inside of here. Keep track of the order of the way things start coming off of here. So this is a bolt. It's chrome. It's got some kind of a finished piece here. So this bevel here slopes downward, and you could actually see this starting to spin as I was removing that. But this part is ready to go. Now all we got to do is get this crown nut off of here. Now, I don't have a wrench that's built for these, a spanner wrench, so I get out my trusty pipe wrench. And I'll bet this is the place where the true professionals, or self-proclaimed, however you want to classify them, they probably go crazy at this point, thinking, no, don't do it. I've had some pretty good success, and I guess I could probably call it luck, with just using this. But if you can track a spanner wrench down, by all means grab it. This shouldn't be that tight, and it didn't take much for me to get that loose. Now this is where everything is going to fall out the bottom here. These are the old ball bearing style, so I want to make sure that I'm ready to catch that. This crown nut here has a slight bevel that on the top surface here. If it doesn't have one on the bottom, I'll want to make sure that I get that oriented correctly when I put this back together. Now I'm going to grab a large towel down here and maybe some kind of a bucket, try and capture these ball bearings as they fall to the floor. Okay, I can see the ball bearings in there. There's a cap here, and those are really dry and in really bad shape. So as I pull these apart, these ball bearings are already coming out the bottom. If you were going to try and reassemble these, you'd want to make sure that they were the same size on the top and bottom and catch them all. So here's the steering stem. This is the lower bearing race, the outer, and there's a dust seal right here. On the underside there's an inner race just like this one that you see up here. All of these ball bearings are the same, but this entire setup here is very dry and long overdue for some maintenance. The next step for me is to get these races out of the steering stem here, and to do that we're just going to drive them down from the top. We'll hit the bottom one out, from the bottom we'll hit the top one out. I'm not going to try and salvage these, so I may get a little bit rough with them. I've put a fresh coat of paint on some of the steering column assembly, and I'm getting ready to put the bearings in there because that's really all that's left. There are a couple of things to notice that with this particular bike, and it may be applicable to yours. The top bearing and the bottom bearing are not the same size. So you want to make sure that if you do have different size bearing and race, that you get those in the right place. And the corresponding dust seals are also different sizes. So this smaller one here goes with the top. For mine, it actually had a number on the packaging of the bearing and race, and then a corresponding number on the top seal. And the bottom set had labels as well, but they have fallen off over the last few days. So when I put this back together, I need to make sure that I get the races in not only on the correct side, but also the correct orientation. And of course, these bearings need to be packed with grease before this is assembled. So we're looking at the front end of this bike, and I've got the upper race ready to go. One thing I want to make sure that I do is get this bevel correct. I want to make sure that it is pointing outwards and up, so that it basically opens up to the outside. The bottom is going to be the same, except it's going to be flipped in so that it opens out and down. So this race is ready to go here. The nice thing about this bike is that the lower race is much bigger, so there's no way I'm going to get those two mixed up. And the important thing here with seating this race is to just do it delicately and evenly around the surface and drive that race down in here. You want to make sure you get this right, because getting these out of here could be a problem. There are a couple of ways you can attempt to get these races in, and I just suggest you start out with the least aggressive and work your way up if need be. Again, I'm just going to use a wooden mallet here, and I'm just going to start tapping around this evenly, just making sure, again, that I've got my orientation correct and that it's going in evenly around the circumference. So that's getting real close, and this 1/8 inch or so is about what I've got left on the inside here. It's starting to tighten up, and so I'm going to take a piece of wood with a hammer and start going around this a little more forceful. Okay, that looks good. I'm just looking on the inside here, making sure that those two mating surfaces are making contact. I want to make sure that that makes contact all the way around, that the top lift is even, and we're good to go on the top. Now this lower race has to go up inside this steering column a little further. Nice thing about it is it's got a pretty large surface here, and I'm probably going to need to use a piece of pipe to fully seat that up inside of this column, but we'll see. So again, I'm just going to get this started out here. Start driving this with light taps, moving around it, and making sure the bevel is correct. This bevel is going to be pointing out and down, like so. So I've got about 1/4 of an inch there, and as you can see, this is flush now, so that makes it almost impossible to hit that with either my rubber mallet or my wooden mallet. So now I'm going to see if I can find a piece of pipe, or if you had a large socket you could do that, but basically something that will sit on the rim of this race so that when you hit it, it drives it up in there evenly. Well, oddly enough, I have an extremely large socket. This happens to be a 36 millimeter. If I didn't have that, I've also got a piece of pipe here that is pretty close to that same diameter as well. But the socket's going to be a little prettier for the camera, so we'll give that a shot. And as I look around this, it just touches the rim of that race all the way around. So we'll use that, try and hold it steady and not scuff up my brand new paint job, and just start driving this in. Okay, we're in. As I look around there, that's even, so we're seated all the way up in there on the mating surface. So this is the bottom race, and the top one looks very similar. This is why you want to make sure that you get this in the right way from the beginning. That surface right here of the race is flush with the inside of this steering column, of this stem. So to get that out, you'd have to pray for a miracle. So the bearings are all greased, and now I'm just going to start assembling this, and I can get this back on the bike. So with the dust seals, or these dust caps, I have two different sizes. The larger one goes on the bottom with the cup or the flanges facing upward. Then I've got my lower bearing, which is going to taper up so that it fits inside of that race that's already in place. And depending on what the tolerances are here, you may need to get something to just drive that bearing down, or at least get it started. You can always drive these bearings into place once you get it back in the steering column by just cramping this thing down with that crown nut and squeezing those bearings into place. But I'm going to see if I've got a pipe that I can just kind of drive that down in just a little bit further than that. So here I've just found a piece of pipe. This is for chain link fencing. This is the top rail, and I'm just going to use it to push this bearing down on just a little bit. I've cleaned out the lower race, and I put a light film of grease on there. Now we can put this lower part of the steering column, or the triple clamp, in place. Now on the top, it's been cleaned and we've got a light film of grease there. So the next thing that goes on here is the upper bearing, followed by the dust seal. There. Then we have our cap, which goes over that, and then our king nut. And again, there's this slight bevel here on this edge that's going to face upward. Now I'm going to get my redneck spanner wrench, tighten this down. I'm actually going to over tighten it, and then I'll back it off to the point where I feel like that's the tension I want. And ultimately I'm just going for tight with just a little bit of friction. I don't want it really tight, and I don't want it loose and sloppy. Turn that so that it doesn't have any play in it. And honestly, my biggest fear here is having the pipe wrench slip off and scratching that beautiful paint job. So I'm tightening this. This will also help seat those bearings and races if there's any play left in them. So at this point it's really tight. I feel good that everything's been seated. Maybe I'll just see if it'll go just a titch more. Okay, now just going to back it off just ever so slightly here. Turn that. Still a little too tight. That's not bad. I think that's where we're going to set it. So the bearing project is pretty much done in this steering stem. I've only finger tightened this bolt and this pinch bolt here. I really can't go any further until I get the forks installed. So that'll be one of the next projects that I wrap up. Thanks for watching.